Okay.
Okay.
So as you know, for on YouTube and Facebook, let's see. I want to make sure we are. Yes, live stream is starting, and then we'll start up the music and let everybody in.
Okay.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to the Veterans Breakfast Club. It's good to be joining you this evening on this chilly night in Pittsburgh. I'm Todd DiPastino. I am the director of the Veterans Breakfast Club, and we're a nonprofit that's been around for 17 years, getting veterans together to share their stories and especially focusing on the military experience, past and present. And man, tonight we have a real celebrity, at least to us, as our guest, Craig Symonds. He's considered the foremost American naval historian there is. He's a professor emeritus from the United States Naval Academy, also the Navy War College, author of, and I verified this, 18 books, co-author and editor of another 11. So that means I only have about 10 more books to read as many books as he's written. So I'm on it. It's my goal. And interviewing Craig will be Glenn Flickinger. Good evening, Glenn. How are you?
Good evening. Good evening, Todd. It's great to be here. Really looking forward to this evening with Craig Symonds. For those of you that might be new to our Thursday nights, this is what we call Greatest Generation Live, all things World War II, every or almost every Thursday night. Veteran interviews where we can still get veterans. It's amazing to me how many veterans we still are able to find. A lot of them through our good friend Scott Masters up in Canada, who is the ultimate hunter of World War II veterans, um, and authors of many different books. Some of the authors are just writing about their Uncle Joe, who served in World War II, or their grandfather Sam, who wrote and served in some way in the war. But occasionally we get an esteemed author like we have tonight with Craig Symonds, who Todd already covered his background, and we're just really pleased as punch to have him look that phrase up. Pleased as punch. I don't know where that comes from. Uh, to uh, to have Craig on again. Now we had Craig Symonds on 3 years ago when his book Nimitz at War came out, and he was very kind and gave us an hour and a half or so 3 years ago. And now here he is with his next book, Annapolis Goes to War, the Naval Academy Class of 1940 and its trial by fire in World War II. So, Craig, thank you for being on. It's a pleasure to have you. Please say hello to the audience.
Thank you, Glenn. I appreciate it. Hello, audience. I'm honored that you would spend time with us here tonight. This should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, you've written 18 books. I imagine you can pick and choose what book you want to write, whatever your next book might be. How did you come to choose this topic as your current book, your most recent book?
Yeah, well, there's two answers to that, Glenn. One is that I had, as you mentioned, completed a book on Chester Nimitz, of whom I'm a great admirer, as I think becomes clear in the reading of that book. And it gave me a really clear picture of what the Pacific War looked like from 30,000 feet. In other words, from the headquarters of SINCPAC, Pacific Ocean area. So looking down from Nimitz's perspective, you get the broad view of the war in large strokes. His relationships with his peers and near peers, and of course his subordinates, the difficult people he had to deal with and how he dealt with them. But I wanted to look at the war too, from the point of view of the junior officers, the ensigns, the JGs, the second lieutenants and first lieutenants who actually fought that war, the deck plate view of the war. And the opportunity to do that came about because of the class of 1940. Now, the class of 1940, of course, has a place in history anyway because of the timing. I mean, they came to Annapolis in the summer of 1936. That's the summer Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland. It's the summer Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals at the Berlin Olympics. It's the summer when the Nuremberg event took place. So there's a lot going on in the broader world. And in the 4 years they were there, all of this is building and building and building. And they're paying some attention to that, but of course, they're also paying attention to their own tribulations as they make their way through the academy. And then the very week they graduated in the June of 1940 was the same week that the British evacuated the beaches at Dunkirk. So this war had been hanging over them like a cloud during their entire Naval Academy experience. So I wanted to talk about what that was like. And then, of course, I also wanted to talk about how it felt for them as junior officers once they joined the fleet. And of course, within 18 months, the war found them and they were cast into a variety of jobs, literally worldwide. So that gave me my chance to look at the war from their point of view.
Right, right. And tell us about the special sort of archive that this class left you as a gift.
Yeah, well, that's the other reason. And it is a gift, absolutely no doubt about it. At their reunion in 1985, however many of them were left, several hundred got together, and they talked about what kind of legacy they might be able to leave behind to the midshipmen who followed them. And of course, they'd given a gift to the academy, like every class does. There's a stained glass window in the chapel. That's the gift of the class of 1940. But they thought, we really want to give these young men, and now women too, an opportunity to see what life was like, not only during our years at the academy, but then once you graduate, what you may be able to look forward to, or at least concern yourself with. So they said, we'll do this, we'll create an archive. Anybody who's willing, anybody who wants to participate, answer these 9 questions in a narrative format. Write out, a little essay about each. Why did I go to the Naval Academy? How did I get in? What was plebe year like? What do I remember most about the Naval Academy? What sports did I participate in? Where did I go upon graduation? What was it like as a junior officer? What do I remember about Pearl Harbor? And so on. And I would say about 150 of them took it seriously enough to write down lengthy, thoughtful, narrative responses to each of those questions. And because they believed they were writing for future generations of midshipmen, they were pretty candid about what they wrote. They wrote things they had never told their children.
Hmm.
So this all went into an archive that was collected and put together and exists now in the special collections of the Nimitz Library. How appropriate is that? The Nimitz Library at the Naval Academy. And that was my principal source for putting this book together.
Yeah. You couldn't have asked for a better Christmas present, I imagine, when you discovered that archive.
Well, it's not that I discovered it. I knew of it when it was being put together. My friend and colleague Bob Love, Robert William Love Jr., who passed away just last month, by the way, was the one who helped the class of 1940 collate all that materials, bring it together, put it into files, organize it, get it on the shelf. So I knew about it when it was happening, but I didn't do anything with it until after I'd finished the book on Nimitz.
Yeah, yeah. But what a treasure trove.
Absolutely. Still is, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. So, Craig, if I could ask you to take us back to sort of 1936 and those first few years in the Naval Academy. It's obviously the height of the Great Depression, Roosevelt in office. Where did these young men come from? What was life like at the Naval Academy that first year or two?
Yeah, well, the short answer to that is they came from all over. Now, I know there's a belief, a tradition that the Naval Academy is some kind of elite institution where we only bring in the sons of admirals and the grandsons of admirals and so on. And there are a handful of those, no doubt about it. Some of them came as legacies. They learned about the Naval Academy because their fathers and or grandfathers or uncles had gone to the Naval Academy and made them aware of it. But the Naval Academy was not a household term for most Americans. And so a lot of the people who came upon it because they found out they just couldn't afford college. Some started college. We were talking a few minutes ago about Robert Harris, who was from Mount Lebanon, suburb of Pittsburgh, who went to the University of Pittsburgh for a year, and then his dad came to him and said, "You know, son, we just can't afford this anymore." But I read this story in the paper. There's a place you can go where you get a free education if you
Yeah.
then agree to serve in the Navy for 5 years. And so, well, that sounds okay. So there were people who sort of stumbled into it that way through financial and economic circumstances. It was the Depression, as you say. A very tiny number of people ever went to college at all. In fact, a relatively small number even graduated from high school in 1935 and 1936. So there was that group. And then a third group comes from the fleet. They're the statutory authority that authorizes the academy, says 100 places must be set aside for people coming from the fleet, and they took exams to see if they were qualified. Some of them had a little bit of education and, like their peers, couldn't afford any more and joined the Navy to save up a little money for later. And so they came from scraping paint to the Naval Academy. So those three broad groups, I think, are characteristic. And of course, because of the way the appointment system was set up, every congressman had the opportunity to nominate, not appoint, but to nominate a candidate for the Naval Academy. So they came from almost literally every congressional district.
So geographically widespread just because of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so in that respect, it was kind of a melting pot. You know, Yankees met Rebs for the first time. Westerners met Easterners. The people from the coast met people from Iowa. So in a way, it was a mixing bowl.
Still at a time in our country where, cross-country travel was not not very common, right? People from the West Coast seldom came to the East Coast, vice versa. So,
Right. And almost nobody flew. If you did it at all, you did it by train or by bus.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So in the mid 30s, as these men matriculate into the academy, what was the environment like then? What was the teaching methods like? What were they learning, and how was that first plebe year in terms of the hazing and the process?
Well, plebe year is plebe year, and every midshipman will tell you, well, mine was the last real plebe year. It got soft after that. But plebe year is an experience. It's tough, and it's supposed to be tough. And each class wants to make sure that subsequent classes suffer at least as much as they did, even if they woefully shake their head and say, "Oh, it was tougher in my day." Um, but the main thing is that I think it was pretty much rote. I mean, things developed first during plebe summer, where it's marching, 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 PT, PT, PT. A lot of that goes on, memorizing nonsense, memorizing some important stuff, but responding to barked commands from upperclassmen, learning to square your corners in Bancroft Hall, all getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning for PT and then showing up for class. All of those things, of course, had to be learned, or in many cases, relearned. Those who had been in the fleet for a year or two had a little bit of advantage in that respect. Those who had come straight from high school found it a little intimidating. Now, the age bracket, by the way, in 1936 was different from what it is today. Today, you can be from 17 to 24. In those days, you had to be from 16 to 20. So they tended to be younger, and a handful of them were still 16 years old
Wow.
when they showed up in Annapolis, many of them away from home for the first time, having traveled 1,000 miles or more by bus away from home, and then being thrown into this alien environment and being yelled at by people who were only 19 years old themselves, but exuded a kind of authoritative briskness that they weren't used to. So plebe year was plebe year, as you can imagine.
Yeah, yeah. And as I remember the numbers here, and I wrote them down, 750 all men, of course, at that time,
Oh man,
matriculated, of which then 456 subsequently graduated.
right.
So there's somewhat of a washout rate, those that couldn't take.
Yeah, and the biggest washout moment was at the end of the first semester. These are people who found out, oh my God, I'm over my head. I just can't handle this. I can't do it either psychologically or educationally or whatever way. 132 were separated, the Navy's term for expulsion, at the end of that first semester. So that's the biggest bump. And then there were smaller numbers later on, mostly for academic lack of success, some for physical requirements, one of which we can probably talk about separately later, and that's the whole eyesight thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the biggest detriment to those who left that first year was the inability to keep up with the academic demands.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's also two other points. I think is it called the Reefs book? What is the
Reef,
name?
oh my gosh, Reef Points.
Reef
All of
Point.
you out there who are Academy grads, all remember your little Reef Points book. There's a book. In fact, that was originally going to be the name of the book,
Ah,
Reef Points.
yeah.
But I told my editor, I said, nobody's going to know what that is. So we went with Annapolis Goes to War because almost everybody's heard of Annapolis by now. But Reef Points is a little booklet handed out to every plebe with stuff you need to know. I mean, some is obvious, here's where things are located. Here are the cheers we do at the football game. Here are your duties and obligations. Here are the traditions of the Navy. But some of it was just nonsensical ditties that you had to memorize and repeat on demand simply because everybody before you had to do that. So I noticed, by the way, in reading through all the Reef Points from the 1930s onward, the book has gotten thicker over time. It was relatively thin, about a quarter inch thick in 1936. It's well over half an inch, maybe three-quarters of an inch thick now, because there's so much more stuff to know. But it's still around. Plebes still get their Reef Points book. They still have to memorize almost everything that's in it.
That's part of the tradition, right? The part of
Yes,
the tradition that cannot be given up.
right.
So the other kind of, I think, humorous story I mentioned to you in my email to you is you increase my vocabulary every time I read your books. And this time, the word that I caught on to was osculation. What is
Yeah,
osculation,
that's
and can you explain why that's featured in one chapter of your book?
well, I can. Osculation, kind of a Victorian word, a throwback to the 19th century without a doubt, is simply an old-fashioned word for lip-on-lip kissing. And it came up because the tradition that had evolved at the academy was that at what's called the passing out parade, the last formal parade of the academic year, when the graduating class takes the colors by the staff, the American color, the American flag, the Navy flag, the Naval Academy flag, and passes those colors on to the next class, the junior class about to become rising seniors, or what were called firsties. And so there's a parade where everyone parades on Warden Field, and then there's this very formal passing of the colors. And as part of that process, the commander of what was called the color company, the company that won the competition in athletics and academics and all sorts of ways, gathering points to demonstrate it is the best, the most competent company in the then regiment, now brigade, would have the honor of being the color company. And the company commander would pick someone, a woman, sometimes a sister, almost always a girlfriend, to be the color girl. And she would assist in passing the colors. She would put her hands on the staff and literally hand them to the next class. And after they'd done that, they'd kiss. Well, maybe not. The commandant of midshipmen, who was a rather hard-boiled, crusty old fellow named Milo Dremel, had seen in the newspaper a photograph taken by a reporter of a girl kissing a sailor coming back from summer cruise, a midshipman. Well, we'll have none of that. And he put out the word, no public osculation in uniform. Well, of course, everybody made terrible fun of the word osculation. Who is this dinosaur to begin with? But also, is this a formal order? Are you going to write this down? No, no, it's not an order. It's just I'm letting you know. So there was a lot of speculation about whether there would be osculation at the passing out parade for the class of 1939 and 1940. And in fact, there was not. So Milo Dremel succeeded in ending the tradition of the kiss after the passing of the colors, at least for that class.
Uh, but I imagine a bit more relaxed in the last few decades.
I've not paid enough attention. The last graduation ceremony I attended was my own retirement in 2005, and I just simply didn't pay attention to whether they kissed or not.
I got to think stopping osculation is a lot like putting your finger in the dike in Holland. It's not.
Well, of course, what happened subsequent to that is when they had the ring dance. And at the ring dance, another tradition was they passed through this enormous, pardon me, enormous paper mache duplicate of the class ring, which they designed themselves. And the girlfriend, the date, whoever it was at the ring dance, would slip the ring onto the finger of the graduating midshipman, and then they'd kiss. Well, we'll have none of that. Um, so what happened is the order came out, again from our friend Milo Dremel. What we'll do is you can shake hands instead. And instead of passing through the ring, you'll all give the rings to your date at the same time while the band plays Navy Blue and Gold. Well, okay, that's fine, I guess. But as soon as the band struck up Navy Blue and Gold, all the lights went out. And guess what happened in the darkness?
You can see the osculation from a mile away.
Absolutely. So the midshipmen won that one.
Yeah. Great stuff. Great stuff. I imagine, do we have some, Todd, do we have some Naval Academy graduates on the program tonight?
That's a good question. If you are a Naval Academy graduate, please put it in the chat or raise your hand. I'll be very curious to know.
Yeah. Because eventually, after we get through World War II, which might take us a little bit longer, I'd love to hear any comments about what, life is like in the last few decades, let's say, at the Naval Academy. Obviously, women at the Naval Academy starting in the 70s?
76.
76, yeah.
First graduating class, 1980.
So back to the numbers a little bit. So 456 graduate, 30 of which are not commissioned for various reasons. But the primary reason was eyesight problems.
That's correct. Yeah, it was a requirement that you could not hold a commission unless you had 20/20 vision uncorrected. No glasses, thank you very much. None of that, by the way, applies anymore at all today, and it's just as well, because as I pointed out in the book, some of those people who were told by the Navy that they were not physically qualified walked over to the Army Department and said, hey, I'm a Naval Academy graduate, and they made him a second lieutenant on the spot, and most of whom rose to the rank of general. So obviously, lack of 20/20 eyesight does not prevent you from being a superb leader and commander. So that's all gone. But for whatever reason, in 1940, they decided that perfect eyesight was required. And people worked really hard. I mean, some of them stopped reading and studying to save their eyesight, and just in the hopes of being able to get a commission.
Yeah. When I read that, I was just fascinated. I mean, sort of never thought about it because I've been blind since age 3, wearing glasses since I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. I didn't realize that you could save your eyesight by not straining it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that's even true, but it's the only thing they could think of.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So 30 are not commissioned, 25 go to the Marines. There you go, Brad Washington.
Yeah, that's a small percentage, of course, out of the class. It's a larger percentage now, but the Marines didn't really have the commission that they have now to be the spear point of American power projection. In those days, the Marines were still kind of living through the last few years of their job as being cops on the ships, protecting shore bases, things like that. The idea that they would lead the charge across the Pacific onto all these Japanese-held islands was being discussed, but it hadn't yet been fully implemented. So the number who were allowed to go into the Marine Corps was only 25, and there were more who wanted to and could not get in because they didn't have previous service as enlisted Marines or whatever criteria were applied at the time. So only 25 out of that 436 went into the Marine Corps.
What's the percentage in more recent years,
Oh,
Craig?
that's a good question. Several hundred.
Several hundred.
I mean, we graduate about 1,000, and I'm just gonna guess, I'm throwing this figure out, 200, 250 might go Marine Corps.
Yeah,
Significant number.
pretty significant. Yeah, yeah, interesting. And then as we get to 1940 and graduation takes place, um, what we do know, I'll mention this, of those who graduated, 76 die in World War II.
Right, right. That is, by the way, the largest number, both in terms of numbers and in terms of percentage of any class from any service academy in any conflict. So they sacrificed.
Very much so. And they were the last class to have a full 4 years of training during the war.
For a half a decade, yeah, right up to 1947, and I think. The next class, the class of 41, they graduated in February, and then the classes of 42 and 43 only had 3 years at the academy, and then that gradually worked back out again. I think the class of 47, Jimmy Carter's class, was the first 4 year class afterward.
Back to the norm. Okay. So when they graduate, how do they decide what part of the fleet they're going to go to?
That's a great question, because this is one of the things that surprised me when I was doing the research. In all of my 30 years teaching there and in the years since, the way it's worked is it's based on class standing. Not just your academic class standing, but your performance as a leader in athletics and all sorts of things. You get points and so forth for various contributions to the brigade. So the number one student in the class walks in this room, and there's a variety of opportunities available. And he or she gets first pick. But in 1940, the way it worked was class standing had nothing to do with it. You could have been the number one graduate in the class. In fact, the number one graduate in the class was one of those who was kicked out for imperfect eyesight. So it didn't even get a commission. So what they did instead was they put all the numbers in a hat and just stirred them all up. It's like a draft notice or something. You reached in, you grabbed a number, and if you got number one, you got first choice. If you got number 456, you got last choice, no matter where your standing was. It was literally the luck of the draw. And not only did you pick, you didn't really pick service selection, because you could not pick Marine Corps, which had already been decided, of course. You could not pick aviation, because you weren't allowed to start that until you'd been commissioned for 2 years, or subs, or any other thing. Everybody went surface line. Everybody went surface line. What you picked was the ship you would go to, a battleship, a cruiser, a destroyer, whatever it might be. And in those days, of course, battleships were still believed to be the queen of war. So the high ranking, those who picked the low numbers, mostly picked battleships.
Yeah. Yeah. Which then I suppose leads us to Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
And
there were probably 150 members of the class at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941.
150. Wow.
Roundabout. That's a round number.
Yeah. Yeah. And that you dedicate a whole chapter in the book to the Day of Infamy and
right.
their experiences there.
Right. Well, you know that in that 18 months between graduation and Pearl Harbor Day, what serious young officers wanted to do was qualify as officer of the deck. That's still true, by the way. One of the reasons destroyers are considered a good place to go for recent graduates of the academy is because of the relatively small wardroom. You have a swifter opportunity to qualify as officer of the deck, which means, I mean, obviously the captain is in charge of the ship all the time, but the captain has to sleep, he has to eat, he has to do paperwork. So during those periods, the officer of the watch, the officer of the deck, for 4-hour chunks of time is de facto commander of the ship. So you have to know a lot of stuff. You have to know what you're doing and what orders to give in case of emergencies. So qualifying to be an officer of the deck is a big rung up that ladder of advancement that all junior officers seek to climb. And by December 7th, 1941, quite a few of the members of the class of 1940 had qualified as officer of the deck, and as fate would have it, 3 of them were officers of the deck on battleships in Pearl Harbor for the morning watch 0800 to noon on December 7th, 1941. So their memories of what happened, how they felt, how it looked, how it smelled, that really gave, I think, a visceral feel of what Pearl Harbor was like for those young men.
Yeah. And as I recall, 10 perish on
That's correct. 10 of them were killed. Three on the Oklahoma. The Oklahoma was one of the outboard. Excuse me. I have a little sit here. This
Go
is
ahead.
water, by the way.
We could tell everybody.
Yeah. The Oklahoma was one of the outboard battleships and took a number of torpedoes, 7 or 8. So it all on the port side, so it just rolled right over, upside down, and
Nice.
trapped men inside. And 3 of them who died in that watery hell were members of the class of 1940. But of course, the ship that took the biggest hit was the Arizona. Bomb went through its armored deck and exploded in its forward magazine and just blew the ship apart. Almost no one had a chance to get away. 1,000 men, give or take, died probably almost instantly, and 7 of them were members of the class of 1940. And of course, they're still there because the Arizona is a national cemetery memorial, and their remains remain inside the Arizona in Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. So what was that like for you to read obviously of those graduates who were at Pearl Harbor and survived, to read those accounts?
Yeah. Um, well, it's searing, and I tried to take the best and most representative aspects of it to talk about in the book, and so I hope that readers of the book will get the same sense I did. But there's been a tendency to say, "Oh, well, we shouldn't have been surprised, and we were bad, and people were in on it, and all that kind of stuff." But I'm telling you, for a young ensign's 23 years old who their whole experience has so far been training and right full rudder and navigating. Now all of a sudden, here's a whole fleet of airplanes coming down on them. I mean, I think you get a really sharp sense of how that changed their lives almost in the blink of an eye. They saw people die, hundreds of people die, people they knew, classmates. So that was a searing experience for all of them.
For the rest of their lives, those that
Yes,
survived, for
yes,
sure. Yeah, yeah. Robert Harris, I think, was on the Pennsylvania.
yeah.
Or
Well,
were
Robert
there?
Harris, the Pennsylvania actually, in a way, was lucky because it was in dry dock.
Yeah,
It was, and therefore you couldn't get to it via torpedoes. It was bombed, and the bombs did damage and killed people. But the ship-killing weapon is the torpedo, and so it was protected from the torpedoes. So that's why the Pennsylvania emerged relatively unscathed.
right. Is there any one of the midshipman stories on December 7th that you'd care to repeat? Something?
Oh, there are so many, and I don't want to talk about. I'll talk about one. William Cross, Crosswell Cross, went by his middle name most of the time. People called him Cross. Everybody had an academy nickname, which they kept for the rest of their lives. So he was known as Cross. And he was sound asleep in his stateroom when, the alarm sounded, and he thought, oh, geez, a drill on Sunday morning, that's getting a little heavy. And he went over, jumped out of his bed, looked out his porthole, and there's a Japanese Zero strafing boats in the harbor. So he threw on his clothes and raced up to his duty station, where his job was to man one of the main gun turrets. Well, a 15, 16-inch gun turret is useless against attacking aircraft. So he had to make a decision on the spot. He sent half his crew off to fight the fires and the other half off to see what they could do to assist in the anti-aircraft fire. The first hits of the torpedoes, this is on the California, the first hits of the torpedoes had taken out the electricity, so the hydraulic lifts that brought ammunition up from the magazine weren't working. So he organized a chain gang to pass these 50-pound pieces of 5-inch ammo up several ladders from deep inside the ship to get them to topside so they could shoot back at the Japanese. And meanwhile, bombs are falling all around him. And finally, the order is given to abandon ship, and he's in the water, and then he's dragged aboard another boat, and he sees people who've been burned so badly their skin falls off them like peeling wallpaper. And an experience like that to a 23-year-old young man, of course, is never to be forgotten.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So before we go further into their experiences in the rest of the war, it's been 35, 40 minutes. Todd, anything? I haven't been following the chat room. Anything in the chat or anything that we could ask our audience to chime in on?
Yeah, let's open it up to the audience. Let's see if we have questions or comments. I know that we have a number in the chat here. I didn't know that Mary Klepper considered joining the United States Naval Academy. Would have gone there, but for her eyesight. Mary Klepper says, wasn't the Maryland there?
The Maryland was there. The Maryland, again, was one of the inboard ships. They were moored in pairs on the south bank of Ford Island. And if you were one of the outboard ships, you took the full fury of the Japanese attack, because not only did you get the dive bombers and the high altitude bombers, but also the torpedo bombers. The Maryland took some serious damage, but because it was an inboard ship, it took no torpedo hits, and that's what allowed it to survive.
Was there ever any criticism, Craig, about the way they moored these battleships, like sort of in reflection, sitting ducks, two at a time?
Hindsight is great. Pearl Harbor is not deep.
Yeah.
And so the parts where battleships can go and can moor is finite. And that area south of Ford Island is the place where they can go and take on supplies and ammo and be prepared to go out again. It's not that we had been, waltzing through peacetime oblivious to what was happening. They upped their time periods of training from 2 days a week to 5 days a week, from morning till night, to operating at night, to operating under wartime conditions. So they were working at it, but this was a Sunday morning. They had just been out, they came back in, and they were moored along the south bank end of Ford Island because that's where they needed to be to take on supplies, to go ashore, to come aboard. So
Yeah, yeah.
Brad Washabaugh has a question.
Yeah.
Hey, Craig, I was wondering about the quality of the education at the Naval Academy at the time compared to other schools, and was engineering emphasized heavily at the time? And the quality of education compared to some of the other schools, did it produce the type of graduate that we needed at the time?
That's a great question, and the short answer to that is not really, because there was such an emphasis on rote memorization. The way classes worked, you marched into class with your guide on, and you put your guide on outside the door, and everybody took the same class at the same time from the same book in the same way. It didn't matter if you'd already had 2 years of college and you had this course before, or if you were right out of high school and never heard of this course before. You were all in the same section, and the instructor would say, draw slips and man the board, and you'd go up and take a question or a problem off the instructor's desk. You'd go to the chalkboard and you'd work it out, and then you'd explain it to the class. The topics were mostly mathematics and engineering, science, chemistry, physics, mechanical engineering, a little bit of electrical engineering. Bull, as it was called at the time, was a combination of English and history, and that took one class in each of the first 2 years, and then that was all. Professional courses like navigation and ordnance were saved for the last 2 years. But the key point is it was all rote instruction. And what's interesting about these memoirs that these members of the class of 1940 left behind is, in talking about it after the fact, when they got to the fleet, a lot of them said, well, that was no use at all. Nothing that I learned there did I find of particular value. I had to start over all over again. They issued everybody a notebook, and you had to learn the engineering plant of that ship. And of course, this is a transitional period where we're going from old steam boilers to turbines and the brand new stuff. So, in a way, what they learned at the Naval Academy was regimentation, orientation, uh, responsibility. But a lot of what they learned in terms of academics, they found they had to relearn again as junior officers. And I will say this, that the education there during my time, 1975 to 2005, was absolutely superb. But by then, a majors program had been instituted. You could validate courses that you had already taken elsewhere so that you could skip to the next level. And that opened up opportunities for elective classes that they could choose, which none of the members of the class of 1940 could do. No choices at all, no majors, no electives. The education I think received by the young men and women that I taught was absolutely superb. I would argue, and I am prejudiced, I'll admit it, it was the best undergraduate education in America.
Well, in an environment where discipline is so important, but critical thinking and critical questioning is important also, how do those two match when you're trying to instill discipline and order, but still be a critical thinker to challenge the norm? I mean, how's that evolved to when you were there?
Yeah, well, there's a certain schizophrenia to the Naval Academy, and it divides across Stribling Walk. Stribling Walk is the brick walkway between Bancroft Hall and the academic buildings in Sampson and what is now Carter Hall, used to be Maury Hall. And that schizophrenia is that in Bancroft Hall, it's the discipline that matters. It's tell me what's in reef points, recite this doggerel, tell me what's on the menu today, what's the chain of command, square your corners, say beat army, do this, do that, give me 20 push-ups. All that's in Bancroft Hall. Once you cross Stribling Walk, now you've got professors who are saying, what do you think about that? And why do you think that? And what do you think about what he just said? So that's where you get your critical thinking. So they have to do both, and they still have to do both. But they didn't then.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Stephen McLeod, you are a fellow historian, historian of the United States Marine Corps in World War II. Did you happen to notice, Stephen, do you happen to notice the book behind Brad Washabaw's right shoulder?
Oh, what a great American he is, huh?
One of 10 copies he has.
That's outstanding. Hey, I appreciate the opportunity. Hey, Craig, it's great to hear your comments this evening.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you.
Well, you know, Brad mentioned critical thinking. So my question is kind of, I'll sort of frame it this way: brown shoe, black shoe.
Yeah.
1940 class, and those guys who were at Pearl Harbor that morning. And for everybody, in case there's somebody in the group that doesn't pick up on that difference, we're talking really the old battle line camp and the sort of the carrier or air camp, which that mix to me is that's a gray area, and I'm very curious about the class of 40.
Well, for the class of 1940, remember every single graduate of that class was required to be a surface warfare officer for 2 years before he could choose anything else. So at Pearl Harbor and for the next 6 months, they were all black shoes. There were no brown shoes among them. Now, a lot of them had come to the Naval Academy in the first place in order to fly. That was their whole purpose in going there, but they had to wait 2 years driving ships around before they had the opportunity even to apply to flight school. Well, of course, once France fell in 1940, Franklin Roosevelt went to Congress and asked for the construction of 50,000 combat aircraft. Well, that was like 7,500% more than they had at the time. So now all of a sudden, lots of people are going to go to flight school, including many members of the class of 1940. So that's when that differentiation began to exist. Early on, of course, as you know, the aviators wore forest green uniforms with brown shoes. So black shoes, surface warfare officers who wore the service dress blue with black shoes, referred to them as brown shoe officers, and they didn't mean it as a compliment. And the brown shoes referred to the ship drivers as black shoes. So there emerged this little bit of tension, and it existed through World War II in that the pilots on board carriers, which came off the American building ways, of course, in 1943 and 1944 by the dozen, the aviators in the carriers had their own wardroom, had their own areas of the ship. And so they developed sometimes a jocular, sometimes a not so jocular rivalry between the brown shoes and the black shoes. But that emerged, as I say, later in the war.
Yeah. I mean, even at the very highest levels, thinking of, say, Spruance versus Mitcher, or, there was that difference of philosophy as to how to fight the war, right?
Yes, absolutely. Chester Nimitz, as we know from the previous book, had a lot of trouble with aviators who thought that no non-aviator should be allowed to command a carrier or a carrier task group. So putting people like Spruance, who was a black shoe, in charge of a carrier task group, or for crying out loud, a whole fleet that included carriers, was anathema to them. And that was a fight that carried out not only within the fleet, but in the halls of Congress. So there was a lot of argument about that. Ernie King, who was, of course, commentioned CNO during World War II, saw this coming early and went to flight school, as did, by the way, Bull Halsey, in their 50s, because they thought, oh, I see this coming. I want to make sure I get my gold wings. They went to flight school and got qualified to command aircraft carriers, and later on, of course, carrier task groups, and in Halsey's case, a whole fleet.
Yeah. Yeah. I see Bob Oles has his hand up, Todd.
Yes, it's Marine night tonight here at the Veterans Breakfast Club. And Bob Oles, you have a question. Why don't you unmute yourself?
You're still muted. There you go.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. It's a real pleasure, Professor Symonds. I have a quick question. Did the Naval Academy curriculum or training change at all when it became obvious that the Atlantic Ocean was now being menaced by the U-boats?
Not immediately, no. There's an old joke in the Navy that you've probably heard that, making policy changes are like pushing a 40-foot sponge. You bounce up against it and you shove it and you shove it and you shove it. It doesn't move very fast. Shifts in curricular design don't really take place until post-war. So no, is the short answer.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you
You're
very
welcome.
much.
Stephen, you have a follow-up.
Oh, we just can't let it go.
Okay,
You know,
fire
we're-
away.
Craig, we're talking, again, so now I'm curious, from your studies in the class of 1940, do you have a sense of the level of study and I would say importance or foresight in the role of air power or the carrier in the fleet, in terms of battle plans, strategy, and all that kind of stuff? Do you have a sense that there was a shift already going in 1940, in the class of 1940?
Not in the curriculum of the Naval Academy. The change was so slow that after Pearl Harbor, not after Pearl Harbor, after the war began, and after the Japanese attacked the ships in the Yangtze River. Help me out with the name here, somebody.
Pearl.
Penne?
Pearl?
Say it again.
You're talking about the vessel, the Penne?
The Penne. Thank you.
There you go.
Little senior moment there. Sorry.
Oh, I got it.
Midshipmen went back into class and said, well, what about this? And their professor said, no, that has nothing to do with us. That's the Japanese are, they're not very clever anyway, and we have nothing to worry about them. Now, draw slips and man the board. So there was a tendency not to take current events into much consideration in what was called education at the time.
So that at sea refueling and all these types of things, they're sort of, we're not good at it. The Japanese can't be good at it.
Right. Pretty much. Yep.
Yeah, at least in terms of the logistics of the fleet. I mean, you got to turn to an admiral that is one of my favorites is Richmond Kelly Turner. Okay, he really is the driving force of the logistical side of the Pacific Fleet. Would you agree with that?
Mostly, yes. I mean, I tend to credit my old friend Chester Nimitz, who, as second in command of the Atlantic Fleet during World War I, first came up with the idea of side-by-side underway refueling, and passed those ideas on to the rest of the fleet, including Turner's amphibious fleet in the Pacific. So I think I would credit Nimitz more than Turner even, but Turner certainly recognized the importance of logistics in ways that others were slow to do. And in fact, the Japanese were well ahead of us. They did underway replenishment on their way to Pearl Harbor. One of the reasons we didn't think an attack on Pearl Harbor was even possible was because you'd have to refuel at sea en route, and we didn't think the Japanese could do it. In fact, of course, they did do it, and they were better at it than we were in 1941 and probably through most of 1942.
Zoom user, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? I could ask it on your behalf. This is Zoom user asks, how many of the class of 1940 were on the 3 Pearl Harbor aircraft carriers, which were not in port on December 7th? And how many were on the submarines in the Pacific Fleet around Pearl Harbor? And where were they assigned after the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Well, none were on submarines because remember the requirement that you can't apply for flight school or sub school or anything else until after you'd been on a surface ship for 2 years. But there were some on carriers, and including the 3 that were not present. There were more on the cruisers and destroyers escorting those carriers that were delivering airplanes to Midway and to Wake Island, and therefore not in Pearl Harbor on the Day of Infamy. The war warning message that went out from Washington on November 27th said this is to be considered a war warning. Do what is necessary to beef up weak points in your defense chain. So Husband Kimmel thought, well, my weak points are Wake Island and Midway. I'm going to send 1 carrier to each with a reinforcement Marine Air Squadron to defend the island. And of course, that Marine Air Squadron on Wake was actually quite important in pushing back the first Japanese attack on Wake Island. And the 3rd carrier, of course, was the Saratoga, which was in a long scheduled refit in Bremerton. So that's why they weren't there in Pearl Harbor. It was not a conspiracy of any kind. It was simply a response to contemporary events. And there were members of the class of 1940, only one of which left behind a sort of exhaustive memoir of that experience. The others were not participants in the activity of putting the archive together.
So unless there's another question, let me move this further into the war, because a key point comes 2 years after graduation, when now those who wanted to go to other parts of the service could do so.
Right.
And in fact, they spread into the subs, they spread into become flyers, all different elements of the naval force, right?
Correct.
So maybe since we were talking aircraft carriers, quite a few become pilots. And which story?
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. I apologize.
Oh, no.
I think the number is 130 ended up going through flight training. And of course, it was very rudimentary. The first of them to show up, having finished their 2 years in surface combat ships, some of whom had been through the meat grinder in the naval battles off Guadalcanal in the late summer and early fall of 1942. But they ended up going mostly to New Orleans for their first experience. Now, New Orleans wasn't even a naval air station yet. It had an airstrip, it had a barracks, and it had a fuel tank. But they gradually expanded. It got larger and larger, and eventually somebody wrote in one of the letters that I found in the archive, said, boy, it's almost like a class reunion here. There are so many of us here now in New Orleans learning to fly. So they would spend 6 weeks to 2 months in New Orleans. Then they would move east to Pensacola, where they would specialize in different planes and get their gold wings. And then they would specialize again into dive bombers, torpedo planes, fighter planes, whatever it might be. And then they would specialize again in terms of ground-based versus carrier-based airplanes. So there were various steps. And so that it wasn't really until late 1943, early 44, that members of the class of 1940, in large numbers, were participating in carrier attacks on Japanese bases and ships.
Is there a shift in that time frame where, in 1940, as they graduated, I imagine many of them had in their mind, I want to be on battleships. I want to be captain of the battleship someday.
Yeah.
Now, as the war progresses, they're young, intelligent men. They see the difference, the changes in the tactics and the weaponry. Was there a shift so that they wanted to be?
There is a shift. It's not like flipping a switch, though. It doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual. And of course, even before Pearl Harbor, there's a sensitivity within the Navy that, a battleship can fire its heavy guns 15 miles or more, but an airplane can deliver it 150 miles or more. Maybe this is a better way to think about this. And of course, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor demonstrated that the long arm of naval ordnance could reach all the way across the broad Pacific. And the Battle of the Coral Sea in May of 1942 was the first battle in history in which the two fleets never sighted one another. By then, it's pretty well confirmed. Carriers have replaced battleships. The assumption by 1938 was that the carriers were there to help the battleships. By 1942, it's pretty obvious that the battleships are there to provide air cover for the carriers. And the battleships are almost worthless because even if you crank them up to the best speed they can go, they might make it to 23 knots, but a carrier can go 33 knots. So they can be escorted by cruisers and destroyers, but the battleships would just slow them down. So they don't even have a job until they need to do gunfire support against shore targets, which they begin to do, of course, at Tarawa in 1943.
Or was it the Pennsylvania class battleships that were the fast battleships?
No, the Pennsylvania class, the Washington, I guess, is the first of the new fast battleships. The North Carolina, the Washington almost simultaneously come out. But yeah, they could keep up with the carriers. So now you can have a task force that consists of not only fast carriers, but fast battleships as well.
And those old battleships drank oil at an alarming rate,
They did. It's really astonishing. I can't dredge the numbers out of my head, but it's thousands of gallons per mile that they burned up. And they're heavy, they're armored, they use up 1,000 men or more. I mean, they're just drinking not only fuel, but manpower. But Nimitz found a role for them in gunfire support for invasions in beginning, as I say, with Tarawa and then all the way up to Iwo Jima and Okinawa.
And on into Korea and Vietnam.
As it turns out, yeah.
The other part, and this is a subject matter that I've always wanted to delve further into on this program with some special programs, are the role of the submarines in the Pacific in World War II. I can't remember the number who went into subs, but I think of that class in 1940, 14 died in submarine sinkings.
I have my book here, but I can't conjure up the number off the top of my head. But if you say it's 14, I believe you. Submarine service is less glamorous than carrier strikes or even battleship confrontations like in Surigao Strait. But I tell you, the submarines are really what defeated Japan. With 2% of the Navy's personnel, they sank 55% of all Japanese shipping sunk during the war. That's a pretty good investment. Now, it's not fun service, it's not happy service, it's dangerous service, it's claustrophobic, it's a number of things, but extraordinarily effective. And I'll just throw this in too, that one of the things that made it effective is that we adopted the German strategy of submarine use. That is, don't attack warships, attack supply ships, merchant ships, transports, trawlers, oilers. Cut Japan off from its line of supply, which is, of course, exactly what the U-boats were seeking to do to Britain in the Atlantic. The Japanese, with their warrior mentality, tended to use their submarines, which were frankly very good, and their torpedoes, vastly superior to ours, to target warships. And they had some spectacular successes with that, but they never succeeded in cutting the line of supply, for example, from the west coast of the United States to Hawaii. Imagine if they had done that. Hawaii has no independent source of fuel. How would you even get the fleet to sea if they cut that line of supply between Long Beach and Honolulu? Never tried, because that's just not in the warrior mentality.
And say that again, Professor, that you thought the Japanese submarines were of high quality. They were well built.
Yes, they were pretty large and long ranged. But mostly it's because their torpedoes, the famous Long Lance torpedo, which was oxygen driven rather than compressed air driven, was more accurate, more deadly, had a bigger warhead, had a longer range. Early in the war, in 1942, in the battles off Guadalcanal, American believed that there must be some other secret weapon that can't have come from so far away. It's just not possible. So that's how far ahead of us they were. Now, of course, we fixed that eventually, shamefully late, but we did get it fixed. And the Mark 18 torpedo, when it replaced the Mark 14 torpedo, proved to be devastating as well.
I've listened to many a podcast about World War II submarines, and it's just unconscionable how many subs went out with however many torpedoes, 16 torpedoes, and only 2 of them worked out of the 16.
Yeah.
And were, sacrificing their lives.
Yeah. And of course, the worst case scenario are things like the Tang, which fired a torpedo that circled back and sunk its own ship and killed almost everybody on board, except O'Kane, who was up in the conning tower.
Yeah, there's a great exhibit at the World War II Museum about the USS Tang, if you've been there.
Yeah. Yes, I have. I'm actually on the board there, but that's, yeah.
Well, we can credit you for having that there.
No. All credit goes to the curators at that wonderful museum.
It is wonderful. We took a group of 30 veterans there, in April, Todd, and just, spent at least 2, maybe 2.5 days in the museum.
Easy to do that. Yep.
It could have been 5 days in the museum.
Yep.
That good.
Agree. Steven, another follow-up here?
Oh, point at me. It's me again. Craig, and apologies to everybody. As I said in the comment here, it almost seems trite, in a way, to pile so much credit to Nimitz on the way things played out in the Pacific, on the strategy, but when you really look at it, his concept of logistics, the submarine, his use of the submarine. Japanese had excellent submarines. They used it in an entirely different way than we did, different concept. But so much of this really, and also let me not forget, on top of those sort of strategic things that he did, but his prowess as a stabilizing force.
Oh, absolutely.
Including from his boss.
Yeah.
To hold things together. And that's, it's easy to say, well, it can't really be that big, was it? But it really seems to be. And I, having just finished your book recently on Nimitz, it just backed that up.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. Tom Buell, who wrote about Raymond Spruance, titled his book The Quiet Warrior, but it's a phrase that would apply to Chester Nimitz as well. And Nimitz and Spruance were peas in a pod. Spruance was Nimitz's chief of staff for 13 months. So they'd had a mind meld, I think, in the way they looked at the war, and both were very successful in that respect. And I'll say this about the submarines, that Charlie Lockwood was another one of Nimitz's close friends. They lived across the street from one another at headquarters on Oahu. Lockwood moved to Guam with him when Nimitz shifted his headquarters. And in fact, if you go to the Yerba Buena Cemetery near San Francisco, they are buried side by side. So Nimitz listened to Lockwood about when his skippers came back and said, hey, these torpedoes don't work. The engineers at Buell-Ord tend to say, oh, you're just a bad shot. But Lockwood believed them, conducted his own tests, went to Nimitz, and Nimitz personally issued the orders to change the protocols for torpedoes and ordered Buord to get to work on a fix. But he didn't make a big stink about it. He just quietly did it.
Yeah. So the quiet warrior really does apply to Nimitz as well.
I agree.
Yeah. It's 8 o'clock or so, Todd. Do we need to take a station break? And after this, I wanted to get into the Marines, the graduates who became Marines. There's just a couple of great stories about that.
Yes, we could just let people know that this is the Veterans Breakfast Club. We assemble here on Zoom and do our live stream every Monday night at 7 and every Thursday night at 7, which means we will be back Monday night at 7 p.m., December 15th, with 2 military contractors who served in Afghanistan. And their job was to deliver the mail. They call themselves the Pony Express, and it's quite a story. And, you know, Glenn, we've talked about this, that we're the Veterans Breakfast Club, but one thing that we haven't addressed as well is this enormous role that military contractors play, especially today in recent wars. So we're going to be addressing that issue, the whole issue of military contractors in Afghanistan, and focusing on the Pony Express. We publish a magazine, a quarterly magazine. We're working on our winter edition now. If you would like a copy, let us know. We send it out for free to about 11,000 households and hand distribute another 8,000 or so. And you could always check out our whole schedule, which we're putting together for 2026 at veteransbreakfastclub.org. All right.
And I would just do a little promotion for next Thursday night on Greatest Generation. Mid-December, it must be time for the Battle of the Bulge.
That's right.
And we are having I'm going to murder his name again, Walter Zapotosky, who is the historian for the 28th Division and has written a new book about the 28th Division and the Battle of the Bulge. We had him on a year ago about the Hurtgen Force, this time the 28th Division, and a kind of a very unique perspective from Walter about the motivations, what drove men to serve in such terrific combat conditions. So that'll be next Thursday, be our last program before the holiday break.
Week from tonight.
Week from tonight, yeah. Okay. So let's turn to the 25 1940 grads who went into the Marines. And,
let's do that.
A couple of names. One is Fred Karch, who I found fascinating. He was one of the men you featured quite a bit.
Yeah.
His photos in there. Tell us a bit about your thoughts on Fred Karch's experience.
Well, Fred not only participated in the archives project, so that I had some testimonial for him, but he also sat for an oral interview, which was very revealing, I think. The whole oral interview archives is another great resource for anybody looking up World War II veterans, or any veteran for that matter. And it's a program that still goes on. We're still interviewing people, as many as we can get our hands on, who are in critical positions at critical times, and asking them to talk about it. But yeah, Fred Karch was fun because Fred was one of those guys at the academy who was arguing with everybody about everything. But his worldview was such that discipline was primary, the most important thing. I mean, he loved the regimentation of the Naval Academy. What's this stuff about critical thinking? Who wants to do that? Let's learn how to march better. So you take that mindset, and he becomes a Marine, and he's a discipline-centered Marine. And he gets a company, gets a platoon, and then he gets a company, and eventually he becomes a second in command of a regiment, and he's the artillery officer. And he participates in a number of the invasions in the Western Pacific, Saipan in particular, Eniwetok and Kwajalein. And he, I think, is very candid about how he sees his role and the role of the Marines. And there is a difference in attitude between the Marines and the Army about how to get things done. A simplistic explanation is to say the Marines say, go fast, go hard, get it over with. And that will reduce the total number of casualties. You'll take some hits going in, but by golly, you'll end it quickly, and then you're done. The Army's view is proceed logically, incrementally, step by step, make sure you've got an artillery preparation, and you will preserve lives. You will still achieve the objective. It may take longer, a few more days, weeks perhaps, but you'll save lives in the long run. And the Marines disagreed with that entirely. No, no, no. The longer any operation continues, the more likely it is you're going to lose people. So Karch was very definitely on the Marine side of that argument, and he was in the center of the big Smith versus Smith argument on Saipan about whether Army generals should command Marines at all. And you get a sense of how Karch, at least, if not all Marines, viewed the particular role that they played in the Western Pacific, especially. So he's an interesting guy. I agree. And of course, if you want to do a follow-on, he leads his brigade ashore as a brigadier general in 1965 in Vietnam, the first ground troops sent into Vietnam.
Yeah, yeah. I found that fascinating, and I, in fact, looked up a little extra about that online. And you know, he made the comment afterwards that he led the Marines ashore at Da Nang. Pretty much thought as long as the Marines showed up and made a lot of noise, made a lot of explosive, things would go pretty well, and the war would be over pretty quickly in Vietnam. And afterwards, he reflects, not so much. We didn't have to show up.
Like most Americans, he underestimated the enemy.
Yeah,
in that war.
So I think Fred Karch for Steve McLeod. I think Fred was part of the 4th Marines, if I have it right.
Yeah.
So who's that? Roy Namur, and other Saipan, Guam. Yep. And one of the interesting stories I found, a bit on the humorous side, but gives you a feel for the character of the man, was when the 4th Marines came back to Maui between campaigns, and he didn't particularly like where they were in Maui. For what reason, Professor?
Well, when they came back to Maui, they had been successful and triumphant, and they were they let all the schools out, and the school children lined the road and waved little American flags and cheered as they marched into camp. And they set up this wonderful camp that had a softball field and a movie theater and all sorts of wonderful things. And Karch said, "What the hell is this? This is not how you get ready for war." And he went to his boss and said, "I want to be relieved of my job so I can train people properly." Well, he got his wish. He took his regiment off into the bush, and he said, "We're going to train like hell." And he got them up before dawn, and they marched, and they fought, and they simulated combat, and they disassembled and reassembled their artillery pieces. And by the time they got ready for the next operation, they were good to go. So again, that's a revealing insight into him in particular. He didn't want any part of this. Let's go to movies on a Saturday night. He wanted to train his men so they'd be ready for combat.
Which I'm sure paid them great dividends when the next
Probably did. Probably saved lives. Yeah.
Steve,
now I'll mention that there were many others. There were 25. I saw that Gary Yost sent in a note and said how many members of the class. He may have tuned in late. There were only 25 members of the class that were allowed to go Marine Corps. There were others who asked for it and didn't get it. But the 25 who went in, they did lots. I mean, 2 of them became platoon commanders in Edson's Raiders, for example, in the Pacific. They were among the first to go ashore at Tulagi during the Guadalcanal campaign. So a lot of other Marines who didn't leave detailed stories behind, and I wish they had, also participated in a lot of this combat, besides Fred Karch. I don't want to make it sound like he's the only one.
Yeah. And the remarkable thing that you point out in your book, of those 25 Marines who fought in all these horrific campaigns, only one of those 25 perishes during the war.
That's correct.
And that's the story of Buck Buchanan.
No. It's
I have that wrong.
Chabot.
I'm sorry, Chad Chabot. I misread.
Yeah. We can talk about Buck too. He's an interesting guy, but Chad Chabot, and I'm a former track guy. I used to run track when I was in school, and he was the top runner for the Naval Academy track team. He held the Naval Academy 100-yard dash record and won almost every race that he ran. And so he was a kind of an athletic star. He got into the Marine Corps. And when the war began, he was guarding the base at Olongapo, and then withdrew down to Mariveles across from Corregidor, and then finally back onto Corregidor Island, where he was captured along with everybody else when the Marines on Corregidor were compelled to surrender. And so his story is one of being a prisoner of war. Now, we know that being a prisoner of war with the Japanese is no fun. He did not participate in the Bataan Death March, but almost as bad. He was paraded, he and many others were paraded through the streets of Manila barefoot and whipped by Japanese on horseback to demonstrate to the native population that the Americans were nothing to be, and they're not going to save you, these Americans. We're in charge now. And then he spent the rest of the war, really, the rest of his war, certainly, in prisoner of war camps. He was sent by the Japanese onto a ship along with hundreds of others, all crammed into a hold, to go back to Manchuria or Korea. We're still not sure what the destination was, but to labor in Japanese war factories, violation of the Geneva Convention, by the way, but be that as it may. When the convoy of which he was a part was attacked by an American submarine, all he knows is here's this tramp steamer going by at 12 knots, and so it was sunk. And as soon as it began to go down, the prisoners broke out of the hold and jumped over the side. The Japanese shot them in the water, recaptured a few of them, killed most of them. We don't know whether Chab drowned or was killed by the Japanese, but he died in, I guess you could call that a friendly fire incident, while being transported from the Philippines back to Japan. And he's the only Marine from the class of 1940 to die in the war at the hands of friendly fire.
Tragic story. That's tragic. We've had a couple of other authors on about their fathers or grandfathers' experience in the Death March of Bataan, and then they were subsequently put on these hell ships.
Right.
And survived. These were, I think the survival rate was like 3%.
Very small.
Tiny portion. And how those men survived those incredibly arduous, inhumane acts from the Japanese is just a mystery to me.
Yeah. One member of the class who went into the drink during the Battle of Sunda Strait from the Houston was captured by the Japanese and sent to Burma to work on the railroad that became the story behind the bridge on the River Kwai. And he spent the rest of the war, but he survived. He lived to tell the story afterward. So.
Yeah, and then back to the name I misnamed, Buck Buchanan. He was also a Japanese POW, but did not work in the Burma.
No, that's an interesting story. We talked earlier about the number of individuals who were allowed to graduate because of their fine academic performance, but declared NPQ, not physically qualified, usually for eyesight. But Buchanan's circumstances were different. When he was working on the foredeck of a ship during a summer cruise, a line wrapped itself around his ankle, really, and just clipped off his foot. Now, they were able to staunch the bleeding and put in a prosthetic and so on, and he was able to walk and march and even play tennis on it. And the authorities decided they would let him go ahead and finish his studies. But of course, you can't commission somebody with a prosthetic foot. We might now, actually, but not in those days. So he graduated in the class of 1940, but then went to work for Sperry Instruments, working on their bomb sites. And he was flying in a Sperry Instruments airplane over Java in 1942 when it was shot down by the Japanese, and he was taken prisoner, and he was thrown into the same prisoner of war camp where the survivors of the USS Houston were being held. And he revealed to them that he had this prosthetic foot. Isn't that funny? Ha, ha, ha. And because Buck Buchanan had been a member of the radio club at the Naval Academy, he was able to scrounge around enough electronic parts to build a radio receiver and hide it in his prosthetic foot So they were able to get news reports from San Francisco about the bombing of Tokyo by Jimmy Doolittle's raiders.
Yeah. And did he finish out the war in that same camp?
Yes, he did, and he survived it. He and his fellow POWs in Java. Now, it was no fun to be a prisoner of war to the Japanese in Java, but it was better than in Burma or the Philippines or other Japanese camps where it was really just not much more than a death camp. They actually occupied a camp that had been built by the Dutch army when it was the Dutch East Indies, and they were fed enough to keep them alive, and so they survived the war.
Yeah. The stories are so plentiful, and they're all fascinating. The book is just a really great read. I highly recommend you get it because we've only scratched the surface of so many great stories. Todd, we only have 10 minutes or so left. Should we entertain other questions from the audience?
Yes, we should. I know Dick Snyder has a question. Dick,
Nice.
if you want to unmute. Here you go. If you just click unmute. There you go. How you doing, Dick?
Okay,
Hello.
it's an honor to speak to you. My question was, once we got into the past December the 7th, how did that affect the students or the midshipmen that were going through Annapolis at the time? Did they change the curriculum, or did we just?
Yes. I don't know in terms of content, but they shortened the curriculum. Of course, class of 1941 graduated in February, so 4 or 5 months early. And then the classes of 42 and 43, this is by presidential declaration, by the way. The classes of 1942 and 43 each had only 3 years instead of 4. So obviously, that's going to affect what courses they take and how long they spend on each subject. And without having investigated it in depth, I'm going to suspect that they did a lot more time with ordnance and navigation on practical steam engineering than they did on calculus, chemistry, and physics.
There's been I just unmuted him, Gilbert Ferry. I saw him waving his hand.
Yeah, Glenn, thank you. Can you hear me?
I
Yes,
can
we-
hear you.
Okay, my apologies. I was in the Army. However,
In that case, you're forgiven.
however, we appreciated the Navy for supporting us because it didn't work very well the other way around. Craig, your memory is unbelievable, and it brings back so many memories for me personally about people that you did not mention per se, but people who were in World War II that each one of us probably knew a bunch. As an example, everybody remembers Cheers, the TV program. Christy, the female actress on that, who always had a weight problem. I think her name was Christy. Her father was the photographer on the USS Panay.
Wow.
And he's the one that took the pictures that were sent
Yeah.
back to Roosevelt, which caused, reaction of the Japanese. Just
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
little side effect.
Right. And absent those pictures, that would not have had as big an impact as it did.
No, I mean, I knew Mickey Ganich, who was
Yeah.
on the Pennsylvania up in the Crow's Nest when it was attacked in his football uniform because they were supposed to play a game on that day. A fellow who was a Navy Anglico on Iwo Jima, last name Martin. You mentioned about nobody being allowed to become an aviator initially in 40, but later on it changed. In some of the colleges, University of California, Berkeley, Stanford, at Cal Berkeley, where I live now, which is where your friend Admiral Nimitz retired.
Right.
There was the Flying Golden Bear Squadron founded by the Navy.
Yes.
The reason they did is because they needed pilots badly. And some of these members, 50 of whom joined, one from UCLA that I knew, I think one from University of San Francisco, but the majority of them from Cal, Some were athletes, some were not. I knew at least 9 of them. I have 4 of their uniforms. One of them was a fellow who was the mascot, the human mascot.
The bear.
Yeah, William Rockwell, and that was a secret society, and no one was ever supposed to know.
Yeah.
But after training with these 50 at Oakland, and then Livermore, and then Beeville, he was one of X number that decided to go Marine Corps, and he flew in World War II. He came back to Cal to get his degree. He got recalled for Korea. He flew again. He retired as lieutenant colonel. I have his uniform and never met him. I talked to his wife. Chuck Kohler, not an officer, didn't go to the Naval Academy. He's still alive at 102. He is the first person wounded in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Still alive.
Wow.
He was sitting in a hangar typing a letter to his mother in violation of what he should have been doing in Ford Island. And he remembers the aircraft coming in and wondering, they're not taking off from here. Where are they coming from? The Japanese torpedo bombers, etc. And he remembers the first bomb going off, and it shattered the window right next to where he was typing, and he got hit with glass shards. It didn't incapacitate him to where he couldn't function. He ran out and manned a 50 caliber machine gun and started firing back. He's still alive, and he definitely should be interviewed.
What's his?
Yeah, he should.
What's his name again?
Chuck or Charles Kohler, Kohler.
Do you have a contact for him, Gil?
I definitely do, but it'd be easier if I gave you my phone number. You could call me afterwards, wouldn't it?
All right.
510-734-2431. We've
right.
tried to get him to go with us as escorts to the 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. And his wife is in not good shape, and he's very reluctant to leave her. So what we're going to try to do is to film him telling his story, and then we will send a copy over there so they can play it for the 80th anniversary, which is, December 7th next year.
Yeah, and that film
85th,
or
85th.
audio, whichever way you decide to go, a copy of that should be sent to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans as well, part of their collection.
And I should add,
you mentioned the museum. I know the architect that designed it. He lives in Napa Valley. He has an office in New York City.
Yeah.
Bart Vorsanger.
Gil Ferry is a font of connections.
Yeah.
And I should also
over...
mention that he's going to be our guest on Monday, January 12th. He was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. Also was part of a little cause celeb early in the Cold War around the Berlin Wall. He's gonna.
How did you've been?
How did I know that? I'm a creepy creep. I look people up, Gil.
Well, you know the word. You know the name Diz Laird, Laird.
No.
No one knows Diz Laird.
Nope.
Diz Laird was on the USS Ranger, which I think had a wooden deck, in the English Channel before we got involved in World War II, albeit the Ranger was there. And while he was there as a pilot, he shot down 2 German reconnaissance aircraft. Then the Ranger was ordered to the Pacific through the Panama Canal, and he was transferred to the Bunker Hill, where he shot down 5 Japanese aircraft. He's the only Navy pilot to have shot down both Japanese and German aircraft. And I have his uniform. I've got 350 uniforms, which I display quite often.
Holy mackerel!
Another fellow who was our neighbor. I don't
hold on, Gil. We're gonna have to go on because we have other people who have questions here,
right.
And we're coming to the end of our program.
I understand. Sure,
but I'm going to follow up with you.
Yes.
Guarantee we'll be making a phone call to you.
No, I'd be happy to tell my story too.
All right, excellent.
That incarceration in East Berlin.
Yeah, wonderful story. Jay Wirtz, how are you?
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm good. Hi, Craig.
Hello.
My question is, what were the sports accomplishments of the class of 1940? Did they beat Army?
Half and half. Yes, they beat Army twice, and Army beat them twice. Navy beat Army when they were plebes, which they loved because that gave them carry on. between the Army game and Christmas, so they love that. And they won again when they were firsties. But in their youngster year and second class year, Army had the better hand. So they ended up with a 500 record in their 4 years there. But of course, it was big doings for them. You know, that mattered, I guess still does. We're going to find out day after tomorrow how it goes this year.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
A game
Zo-
taken on epic proportions for a long time.
Yep.
Zoom user has, I think they're going to close our program here with this question. Were there any members of the class of 1940 aboard the USS Indianapolis?
Not that I know of. If so, they never left it in the archive. There were members on some of the escorting ships nearby, on the Phoenix, for example, but not on the Indianapolis when it was sunk.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Craig Symonds, thank you very much for your generosity in spending this time with us. Thanks to all of you for participating. We hope to see you on Monday night. And Gil, we're going to be following up with you about January 12th and also connecting to that World War II Pearl Harbor veteran. All right.
And can I just say thank you to everybody for your continued interest in the war. Good for you. And good night.
Thank you, Professor. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
You
Good
bet.
night.
My pleasure.